Oh, hello there. I think we're live. Welcome, welcome to another Tuesday night live horror reading. And as always, if you are watching live, say hi to me on the side chat and let me know that you can see me and hear me okay. I appreciate that. We had a few issues last Tuesday night, if you remember, but Thursday was great. Sunday was great. So I don't know. Uh, it might be okay. Although one of my screens I show frozen, but not the important screens. All right, so uh yeah, thanks everyone. Let's see. Suzanne, Marianne, Alan, Kelly, Kim. How are you guys doing? So I think you guys all know this by now, but I'll repeat it for those who don't and who may watch this in the future. Starting next week, this will be a Patreons only thing. At the lowest tier, $5 a month. Scott, hey buddy. So it'll be just like this. It will be on YouTube, but only Patreons will have the link each Tuesday and each Thursday. Sundays will always be free. Um, what else? I'll announce it in the usual places to remind you every Tuesday and Thursday, but then also on Patreon. I'll give you the link there. So if you're not a Patreon yet, and if you're questioning, is this worth it or not? Well, not only do you get these 8 nights a week, or excuse me, 8 nights a week, 8 nights a month, but you also get all the other Patreon podcasts, of which there are many. DeBronzo and I interviewed Victor Laval the other day for another deep background episode, and that will be, I gotta post the Reggie Oliver one probably tomorrow, and then I'll post Victor next week. But yeah, it was a great conversation, and it's just another example of what you get with the Patreon. So anyway, last but not least, if you really can't afford $5 a month and you really love these evenings and you don't want to miss out on them, email me. Um, the my email is in the show notes, but I'll put it here in the side chat too, and I'll see what I can work out. Um, so I'm going to read one or two Arthur Machen stories. The last couple of weeks, I've read stories from Stranger Than Science. Endlessly fascinating little book. And if you guys want, in the future, I'll read the occasional story from here and keep it handy too. But you guys have to let me know if that's something that you want, or if you're done with those. Kim says the miserable heat broke this evening. Yeah, it's it's been looking like it's going to storm all day today here in North Texas. It hasn't yet, but it was early 90s as opposed to high 90s and early 100s, so it felt like a little bit of a break. Um, all right, more please. We'll do that sometime in the next couple of months. We'll read some more of these. I will, the royal we. All right, so I don't doubt that everyone listening to me is familiar with who Arthur Machen is, but just briefly, I'll read a couple of items out of Wikipedia because I can't do it any better than that. It was the pen name of Arthur Llewellyn Jones. He was born in 1863, died in 1947. Boy, talk about some changes that guy saw in his in his life. And yeah, what else do we want to say about him? Of course, probably his most famous work is The Great God Pan. And, in Stephen King's In mentions The Great God Pan, his novella In. If you've not read that, you really should. It's one of Stephen King's best stories in his long career, bar none. So, let's read. I did get a request to read In, Machen's In, but that's a long one. We may do that one in the future, but I might have to break it up. Um, Scott, it's your Friday night, isn't it? How you doing, buddy? Scott asked me about what day of the month the Patreon takes the money out. The answer to that is it entirely depends on when you join. So, in other words, you pretty much choose that. So, let's read. Let's start with the ceremony. What do you guys think? Since Tuesday night, here's a painful segue, is our ceremony tradition the last year or so. And I know, I'll tell you, what as Scott, everyone who watches, especially live, really encourages me to keep doing this. But I share this love of old time radio with Scott Thomas and his brother Jeff. And uh, to to Scott, to feel like you were getting enjoyment out of me reading stories in a bit of the same way as you listen to old time radio, um, is kind of neat. It's encouraging to me. Let's read the ceremony. So Thursday night will be, if you haven't signed up for the Patreon yet, folks, Thursday night will still be available to everyone starting a week from tonight. That's when the patron only will start. So you still have 7 days left. And just like now, if you're a Patreon member and you can't watch live on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night, that video will be available to you to watch later. So nothing really is going to change other than that it's going to be for Patreons only. Anyway, enough preamble. The ceremony, Arthur Machen. I haven't read these in a long time. From her childhood, from those early and misty days which began to seem unreal, she collected the gray stone in the wood. It was something between the pillar and the pyramid in shape, and its gray solemnity amidst the leaves and the grass shone and shone from those early years always with some hint of wonder. She remembered how, when she was quite a little girl, she had strayed one day on a hot afternoon from her nurse's side, and only a little way in the wood. The gray stone rose from the grass, and she cried out and ran back in panic terror. What a silly little girl, the nurse had said. It's only the stone. She had quite forgotten the name that the servant had given, and she was always ashamed to ask as she grew older. Hey, Frank. But always that hot day, that burning afternoon of her childhood, when she had first looked consciously on the gray image in the wood, remained not a memory, but a sensation. The wide wood swelling like the sea, the tossing of the bright boughs in the sunshine, the sweet smell of the grass, and flowers, the beating of the summer wind upon her cheek, the gloom of the underglade rich, indistinct, gorgeous, significant as old tapestry. She could feel it and see it all, and the scent of it was in her nostrils. And in the midst of the picture, where the strange plants grew gross in shadow, was the old gray shape of the stone. But there were in her mind broken remnants of another and a far earlier impression. It was all uncertain, the shadow of a shadow so vague that it might well have been a dream that had mingled with the confused waking thoughts of a little child. She did not know that she remembered. She rather remembered the memory. But again, it was a summer day, and a woman, perhaps the same nurse, held her in her arms and went through the wood. The woman carried bright flowers in one hand. The dream had in it a glow of bright red and the perfume of cottage roses. Then she saw herself put down for a moment on the grass, and the red color stained the grim stone. And there was nothing else except that one night she woke up and heard the nurse sobbing. What's the matter, Jupiter? You okay, buddy? Are we live? Yes, we're live. Two cats in here tonight. She often used to think of the strangeness of very early life. One came, it seemed, from a dark cloud. There was a glow of light, but for a moment, and afterwards, the night. It was as if one gazed at a velvet curtain, heavy, mysterious, impenetrable blackness, and then, for the twinkling of an eye, one spied through a pinhole a storied town that flamed with fire about its walls and pinnacles. And then, again, the folding darkness so that sight became illusion, almost in the seeing. So to her was that earliest doubtful vision of the gray stone, of the red color spilled upon it, with the incongruous, episode of the nursemaid who wept at night. But the later memory was clear. She could feel even now the inconsequent terror that sent her away shrieking, running to the nurse's skirts. Afterwards, through the days of girlhood, the stone had taken its place amongst the vast array of unintelligible things which haunt every child's imagination. It was part of life, to be accepted and not questioned. Her elders spoke of many things which she could not understand. She opened books and was dimly amazed, and in the Bible there were many phrases which seemed strange. Indeed, she was often puzzled by her parents' conduct, by their looks at one another, by their half words, and among all these problems, which she hardly recognized as problems, was the gray, ancient figure rising from the dark grass. Some semi-conscious impulse made her haunt the wood where shadow enshrined the stone. One thing was noticeable, that all through the summer months, the passers-by dropped flowers there. Withered blossoms were always on the ground, amongst the grass, and on the stone fresh blooms constantly appeared. From the daffodil to the Michaelmas daisy, there was marked the calendar of the cottage gardens. and in the winter she had seen sprays of juniper and box, mistletoe, and holly. Once she had been drawn through the bushes by a red glow, as if there had been a fire in the wood, and when she came to the place all the stones shone, and all the ground about it was bright with roses. In her 18th year, she went one day into the wood, carrying with her a book that she was reading. She hid herself in a nook of hazel, and her soul was full of poetry. Nice phrase. When there was a rustling, the rapping of parted boughs returning to their place, her concealment was but a little way from the stone, and she peered through the net of boughs and saw a girl timidly approaching. She knew her quite well. It was Anne Dolan, the daughter of a laborer, lately a promising pupil at Sunday school. Annie was a nice-mannered girl, never failing in her curtsy, wonderful for her knowledge of the Jewish kings. Her face had taken an expression that whispered, that hinted strange things. There was a light and a glow behind the veil of flesh, and in her hand she bore lilies. The lady hidden in hazels watched Annie come close to the gray image. For a moment her whole body palpitated with expectation. Almost the sense of what was to happen dawned upon her. She watched Annie crown the stone with flowers. She watched the amazing ceremony that followed. And yet, in spite of all her blushing shame, she herself bore blossoms to the wood a few months later. She laid white hothouse lilies upon the stone, and orchids of dying purple, and crimson exotic flowers. Having kissed the gray image with devout passion, she performed there all the antique, immemorial rite. If I ever knew what that story meant, I don't remember what that is. So that was The Ceremony by Arthur Machen. And I was going to say a minute ago, I gotta keep tonight short, but let's see here. See if I can fit in one more or not tonight. And which one am I in the mood for? Very ambiguous. Well, change might be a little, I don't know, hard to read. Yeah, I guess you can, audio is fine. Let's do that, and then we'll be done. Change by Arthur Machen. Here, said Mr. Vincent Rimmer, fumbling in the pigeonholes of his great and ancient bureau, is an oddity which may interest you. He drew a sheet of paper out of the dark place where it had been hidden and handed it to Reynolds, his curious guest. The oddity was an ordinary sheet of notepaper, of a sort which has long been popular, a bluish gray with slight flecks and streaks of a darker blue embedded in its substance. It had yellowed a little with age at the edges. The outer page was blank. Reynolds laid it open and spread it out on the table beside his chair. He read something like this. And here we have a bunch of vowels in a 7-by-5 table that I will not attempt to read. Reynolds scanned it with a stupefied perplexity. What on earth is it? He said. Does it mean anything? Is it a cipher or a silly game or what? Mr. Rimmer chuckled. I thought it might puzzle you, he remarked. Did you happen to notice anything about the writing? Anything out of the way at all? Reynolds scanned the document more closely. Well, I don't know that there is anything out of the way in the script itself. The letters are rather big, perhaps, and they are rather clumsily formed, but it's difficult to judge handwriting by a few letters, repeated again and again. But apart from the writing, what is it? That's a question that must wait a bit. There are many strange things related to that bit of paper. But one of the strangest things about it is this, that it is intimately connected with the Darren mystery. What mystery did you say? The Darren mystery? I don't think I've ever heard of it. You all right, Jupiter? Well, it was a little before your time, and in any case, I don't see how you could have heard of it. There were certainly some very curious and unusual circumstances in the case, but I don't think that they were generally known, and if they were known, they were not understood. You won't wonder at that, perhaps, when you consider that the bit of paper before you was one of those circumstances. But what exactly happened? That is largely a matter of conjecture. But anyway, here's the outside of the case for a beginning. Now, to start with, I don't suppose you've ever been to Miriam. Well, you should go. It's a beautiful country in West Wales with a fine sea coast and some very pleasant places to stay at, and none of them too large or too popular. One of the smallest of these places, Trinnet, is just a village. There is a wooded height above it called the Alt, and down below the church, with a Celtic cross in the churchyard, a dozen or so of cottages, a row of lodging houses on the slope round the corner, a few more cottages dotted along the road to Meros, and that's all. Below the village are marshy meadows where the brook that comes from the hills spreads abroad, and then the dunes and the sea stretching away to the Dragon's Head in the far east, and enclosed to the west by the beginnings of the limestone cliffs. There are fine, broad sands all the way between Trinnet and Porth, the market town, about a mile and a half away, and it's just the place for children. Well, just 45 years ago, Trinnet was having a very successful season. In August, there must have been 18 or 19 visitors in the village. I was staying in Porth at the time, and when I walked over, it struck me that the Trinnet beach was quite crowded. 8 or 9 children castle building and learning to swim and looking for shells and all the usual diversions. Excuse me, I'm just gonna look after my cat here. Okay, he's fine. The grown-up people sat in groups around the edge of the dunes and read and gossiped or took a turn towards Porth, or perhaps tried to catch prawns in the rock pools at the other end of the sands. Although altogether a very pleasant, happy scene in its simple way, and as it was a beautiful summer, I have no doubt that they all enjoyed themselves very much. I walked to Trinity and back 3 or 4 times, and I noticed that most of the children were more or less in charge of a very pretty dark girl, quite young, who seemed to advise in laying out the ground plan of the castle, and to take off her stockings and tuck up her skirts, We thought a lot of legs in those days. Okay. When the bathers required supervision. She also indicated the kinds of shells which deserved the attention of collectors. An extremely serviceable girl. They thought a lot of legs in those days. Hmm. Okay. It seemed that this girl, Alex Hayes, was really in charge of the children, or of the greater part of them. She was a sort of nursery governess or lady of all work to Mrs. Brown, who had come down from London in the early part of July with Miss Hayes and little Michael, a child of 8, who refused to recover nicely from his attack of measles. Mr. Brown had joined them at the end of the month with the 2 elder children, Jack and Rosamond. Then there were the Smiths with their little family, and the Robinsons with their 3, and the fathers and mothers sitting on the beach every morning got to know each other very easily. Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Robinson soon appreciated Mrs. Hayes' merits as a child herd. They noticed that Mrs. Brown sat placid and went on knitting in the sun, quite safe and unperturbed, while they suffered from recurrent alarms. Jack Smith, though barely 14, would be seen dashing through the waves out to sea, as if he had quite made up his mind to swim to the Dragon's Head about 20 miles away. Or Jane Robinson in bright pink would appear suddenly right away among the rocks of the point, ready to vanish into the perilous unknown round the corner. Hence, alarms and excursions, tiring expeditions of rescue through soft sand and over slippery rocks under a hot sun. And then these ladies would discover that certain of their offspring had entirely disappeared or were altogether missing from the landscape, and dreadful and true tales of children who had driven tunnels into the sand and had been overwhelmed therein rushed to the mind. And all the while Mrs. Brown sat serene, confident in the overseership of her Miss Hayes. So, as was to be gathered, the other 2 took counsel together. Mrs. Brown was approached, and something called an arrangement was made by which Miss Hayes undertook the joint mastership of all 3 packs, greatly to the ease of Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Robinson. Where have you gone, Mrs. Robinson? It was about this time, I suppose, that I got to know this group of holiday makers. I had met Smith, whom I knew slightly in town in the street of Porth, just as I was setting out for one of my morning walks. We strolled together to Trinnet on the firm sand, down by the water's edge, and introductions went round, and I joined the party and sat with them, watching the various diversions of the children and capable superintendence of Miss Hayes. Now, there's a queer thing about this little place, said Brown, a genial man connected, I believe, with Lloyd's. Wouldn't you say that this was as healthy a spot as any you could find? Well sheltered from the north, southern aspect, never too cold in winter, fresh sea breeze in summer. What could you have more? Well, I replied, it always agrees with me very well. A little relaxing, perhaps, but I like being relaxed. Isn't it a healthy place then? What makes you think so? I'll tell you. We have rooms in Govan Terrace up there on the hillside. The other night I woke up with a coughing fit. I got out of bed to get a drink of water and then had a look out of the windows to see what sort of night it was. I didn't like the look of those clouds in the southwest after sunset the night before. As you can see, the upper windows of Govan Terrace command a good many of the village houses. And do you know there was a light in almost every house at 2 o'clock in the morning? Apparently the village is full of sick people, but who would have thought it? We were sitting a little apart from the rest. Smith had brought a London paper from Porth, and he and Robinson had their heads together over the city article. The three women were knitting and talking hard, and down by the blue, creaming water, Miss Hayes and her crew were playing happily in the sunshine. Right, Kim? Do you mind if I said to Brown, if I swear you to secrecy? A limited secrecy. I don't want you to speak of this to any of the village people. They wouldn't like it. And have you told your wife or any of the party about what you saw? As a matter of fact, I haven't said a word of it to anybody. Illness isn't a very cheerful topic for a holiday, is it? Well, what's up? You don't mean to say there's some sort of epidemic in the place that they're keeping dark? I say that would be awful. We should have to leave at once. Think of the children. Think of the children. Won't somebody think of the children? Nothing of the kind. I don't think that there's a single case of illness in the place, unless you count old Thomas Evans, who has been in what he calls a decline for 30 years. You won't say anything? Then I'm going to give you a shock. The people have a light burning in their houses all night to keep out the fairies. Okay, I'll be right back. I gotta let Monty out. 1 second. Okay, Monty. Monty's gonna assist me for the rest of this. Well, I must say it was a success. Brown looked frightened. Not of the fairies, most certainly not. Rather at the reversion of his established order of things. Don't pick on Jupiter, please. He occupied his business in the city. He lived in an extremely comfortable house at Adamscombe. Saying that right? He was a keen, though sane, adherent of the Liberal Party, and in the world between those points, there was no room at all either for fairies or for people who believed in fairies. The latter were almost as fabulous to him as the former, and still more objectionable. I guess he wouldn't like Mr. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, would he? Look here, he said at last, you're pulling my leg. Nobody believes in fairies. They haven't for hundreds of years. Shakespeare didn't believe in fairies. He says so. Again, I'm going to have to refer you to Dr. Doyle. I let him run on. He implored me to tell him whether it was typhoid or only measles or even chickenpox. Monty, you're a one-cat hurricane. I said at last, you seem very positive on the subject of fairies. Are you sure there are no such things? Of course I am, said Brown, very crossly. How do you know? It is a shocking thing to be asked a question like that, to which, be it observed, there is no answer. I left him seething dangerously. Remember, I said, not a word of lit windows to anybody, but if you are uneasy as to epidemics, ask the doctor about it. Exactly what I was thinking, Kim. Can't prove a negative. He nodded his head glumly. I knew he was drawing all sorts of false conclusions, and for the rest of our stay, I would say that he did not seek me out until the last day of his visit. I had no doubt that he put me down as a believer in fairies and a maniac. But it is, I consider, good for men who live between the city and liberal politics and Adams Comby. Comby? Monty, now you're just, uh, sorry. He's just chasing Jupiter. You're kind of being a bully there, dude. To be made to realize that there is a world elsewhere, damn straight. And as it happens, it was quite true that most of the Trinant people believed in the fairies and were horribly afraid of them. But this was only an interlude. I often strolled over and joined the party, and I took up my freedom with the young members by contributing posts and a tennis net to the beach sports. They had brought down rackets and balls and the vague idea that they might be able to get a game somehow and somewhere. And my contribution was warmly welcomed. I helped Miss Hayes to fix the net, and she marked out the court. Oh, okay, I see what that means. With the help of many suggestions from the elder children, to which she did not pay the slightest attention. I think the constant disputes as to whether the ball was in or out brightened the game, though Wimbledon would not have approved. I say not. And sometimes the older children accompanied their parents to Porth in the evening and watched the famous Japanese jugglers or Pepper's Ghost at the assembly rooms, or listened to the mysterious musicians at the Dayberry Gardens. And altogether, everybody had, you would say, a very jolly time. That's a terrible accent. It all came to a dreadful end. And then it all fell apart. One morning, when I had come out on my usual morning stroll from Porth and had got to the camping ground of the party at the edge of the dunes, I found somewhat to my surprise that there was nobody there. I was afraid that Brown had been in part justified in his dread of concealed epidemics, and that some of the children had caught something in the village. So I walked up in the direction of Gavin Terrace and found Brown standing at the bottom of his flight of steps and looking very much upset. I hailed him. I say, I began, I hope you weren't right after all. None of the children down with measles or anything of that sort? It's something worse than measles. We none of us know what has happened. The doctor can make nothing of it. Come in and we can talk it over. Just then, a procession came down from the steps, leading from a house a few doors further on. First of all, there was the porter from the station, with a pile of luggage on his truck. Then came the two elder Smith children, Jack and Millicent, and finally, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Good movie. Mr. Smith was carrying something wrapped in a bundle in his arms. Where's Bob? He was the youngest. A brave, rosy little man of 5 or 6. Smith's carrying him, murmured Brown. What happened? Has he hurt himself on the rocks? I hope it's nothing serious. I was going forward to make my inquiries, but Brown put a hand on my arm and checked me. Then I looked at the Smith party more closely, and I saw at once that there was something very much amiss. Monty is Where was I? Something very much amiss. The two elder children had been crying, though the boy was doing his best to put up a brave face against disaster, whatever it was. Mrs. Smith had drawn her veil over her face and stumbled as she walked, and on Smith's face there was a horror, as of ill dreams. Sorry, I gotta let my Jupiter out. He's about to get the hell out of here. All right, your tonight's episode is brought to you by Monty causing trouble. Okay, we're Look, said Brown in his low voice. Smith had half turned as he set out with his burden to walk down the hill to the station. I don't think he knew we were there. I don't think any of the party had noticed us as we stood on the bottom step, half hidden by a blossoming shrub. But as he turned uncertainly like a man in the dark, the wrappings fell a little away from what he carried, and I saw a little wizened yellow face peering out, malignant, deplorable. I turned helplessly to Brown as that most wretched procession went on its way and vanished out of sight. What on earth has happened? That's not Bobby. Who is it? Come into the house, said Brown, and he went before me up the long flight of steps that led to the terrace. There was a shriek and a noise of thin, shrill, high-pitched laughter as we came into the lodging house. That's Miss Hayes in blaspheming hysterics, said Brown grimly. My wife's looking after her. The children are in the room at the back. I daren't let them go out by themselves in this awful place. He beat with his foot on the floor and glared at me, awestruck, a solid man, shaken. Well, he said at last, I'll tell you what we know, and as far as I can make out, that's very little. However, you know, Miss Hayes, who helps Mrs. Brown with the children, had more or less taken over the charge of the lot. The young Robinsons and the Smiths, too. You've seen how well she looks after them all the sands in the morning, after them all on the sands in the morning. In the afternoon, she's been taking them inland for a change. You know, there's beautiful country if you go a little way inland. Rather wild and woodly, but still very nice, pleasant and shady. Not the time, mister. Miss Hayes thought that the all-day glare of the sun on the sands might not be very good for the small ones, and my wife agreed with her. So they took their teas with them and picnicked in the woods and enjoyed themselves very much, I believe. They didn't go more than a couple of miles or three at the outside, and the little ones used to take turns in a go-kart. They never seemed too tired. Yesterday at lunch, they were talking about some caves, Auntie, called the Darren, about 2 miles away. My children seemed very anxious to see them, and Mrs. Probert, our landlady, said that they were quite safe. So the Smiths and the Robinsons were called in, and they were enthusiastic too. And the whole party set off with their tea baskets and candles and matches in Mrs. Hayes' charge. Somehow they made a later start than usual, and from what I can make out, They enjoyed themselves so much in the cool, dark cave, first of all exploring and then looking for treasure, and winding up with tea by candlelight, that they didn't notice how the time was going. Nobody had a watch, and by the time they'd packed up their traps and came out from underground, it was quite dark. They had a little trouble making out the way at first, but not very much, and came along in high spirits, tumbling over molehills and each other and finding it all quite an adventure. Hey, bud, let's settle down, all right? They had got down in the road there and were sorting themselves out into the three parties when someone called out, "Where's Bobby Smith?" Well, he wasn't there. The usual story. Everybody thought he was with somebody else. That's my water. They were all mixed up in the dark, talking and laughing and shrieking at the top of their voices and taking everything for granted. I suppose it was like that, but poor little Bob was missing. You can guess what a scene there was. Everybody was much too frightened to scold Mrs. Hayes, who had no doubt been extremely careless, to say the least of it. Not like her. Robinson pulled us together. He told Mrs. Smith that the little chap would be perfectly all right. There were no precipices to fall over and no water to fall into, the way they'd been, that it was a warm night and the child had had a good stuffing tea, and he would be right as rain when they found him. Well, my theories on parenthood may differ, but okay. So we got a man from the farm with a lantern and Miss Hayes to show us exactly where they'd been, and Smith and Robinson and I went off to find poor Bobby, feeling a good deal better than at first. I noticed that the farm man seemed a good deal put out when we told him what had happened and where we were going. "Got lost in the darn," he said. "Indeed, that is a pity." That set Smith off at once, and he asked Williams what he meant. What was the matter with the place? Williams said that there was nothing the matter with it at all, whatever, but it was a tiresome place to be in after dark. No kidding. That reminded me of what you were saying a couple of weeks ago about the people here. Some damn superstitious nonsense, I said to myself, and thanked God it was nothing worse. I thought the fellow might be going to tell us of a masked bog or something like that. I gave Smith a hint in a whisper as to where the land lay, and we went on, hoping to come on little Bob any minute. Nearly all the way we were going through open fields without any cover or bracken or anything of that sort, and Williams kept twirling his lantern, and Miss Hayes and the rest of us called out the child's name. There didn't seem much chance of missing him. However, we saw nothing of him till we got to the Darren. It's an odd sort of place, I should think. You're in an ordinary field with a gentle upward slope, and you come to a gate, and down you go into a deep, narrow valley. A regular nest of valleys as far as I could make out in the dark, one leading into another, and the sides covered with trees. The famous caves were on one of these steep slopes, and of course we all went in. They didn't stretch far. Nobody could have got lost in them, even if the candles gave out. We searched the place thoroughly and saw where the children had had their tea. No signs of Bobby. So we went on down the valley between the woods till we came out to where it opens up into a wide space, with one tree growing all alone in the middle. And then we heard a miserable, whining noise, like some little creature that's got hurt. And there, under the tree, was what you saw poor Smith carrying in his arms this morning. It fought like a wildcat when Smith tried to pick it up and jabbered some unearthly sort of gibberish. Then Miss Hayes came along and seemed to soothe it, and it's been quiet ever since. The man with the lantern was shaking with terror. The sweat was pouring down his face. I stared hard at Brown, and I thought to myself, you are in very much the same condition as Williams. This reminds me of a Stephen King story called The Jaunt, for some reason. Brown was obviously overcome with dread. We sat there in silence. Why do you say it? I asked. Why don't you say him? You saw. Do you mean to tell me seriously that you don't believe that child you helped to bring home was Bobby? What does Mrs. Smith say? She says the clothes are the same. I suppose it must be Bobby. The doctor from Porth says the child must have had a severe shock. I don't think he knows anything about it. He stuttered over his words and said at last, I was thinking of what you said about the lighted windows. I hoped you might be able to help. Can you do anything? We are leaving this afternoon. All of us. Is there nothing to be done? I am afraid not. I had nothing else to say. We shook hands and parted without more words. Starting to remember this story now. It really sneaks up on you. It's just very describing just this fun vacation place, ordinary life, and then this happens. The next day I walked over to the Darren. There was something fearful about the place, even in the haze of a golden afternoon. As Brown had said, the entrance and the disclosure of it were sudden and abrupt. The fields of the approach held no hint of what was to come. Then past the gate the ground fell violently on every side. Gray rocks of an ill shape pierced through it, and the ash trees on the steep slopes overshadowed all. The descent was into silence, without the singing of a bird, into a wizard's shade, and at the farther end, where the wooded heights retreated somewhat, there was the open space, or circus or turf, and in the middle of it, a very ancient, twisted thorn tree, beneath which the party in the dark had found the little creature that whined and cried out in unknown speech. I turned about, and on my way back I entered the caves and lit the carriage candle I had brought with me. There was nothing much to see. I never think there is much to see in caves. There was the place where the children and others before them had taken their tea, with a ring of blackened stones within which many fires and twigs had been kindled. In caves or out of caves, townsfolk in the country are always alike in leaving untidy and unseemly litter behind. And here were the usual scraps of greasy paper, daubed with smears of jam and butter, the half-eaten sandwich, and the gnawed crust. Remember, only you can prevent cave fires. Amidst all this nastiness, I saw a piece of folded notepaper, and in sheer idleness picked it up and opened it. You have just seen it. When I asked you if you had saw anything peculiar about the writing, you said that the letters were rather big and clumsy. The reason of that is that they were written by a child. I don't think you examined the back of the second leaf. Look, Rosamund. Rosamund Brown, that is, and beneath there, in the corner, Reynolds looked and read and gaped aghast. That was her other name, her name in the dark. Name in the dark? In the dark night of the Sabbath. That pretty girl had caught them all. They were in her hands, those wretched children, like the clay images she made. I found one of these things hidden in a cleft of the rocks near the place where they had made their fire. I ground it into dust beneath my feet. And I wonder what her name was? They called her, I think, the bridegroom and the bride. Did you ever find out who she was or where she came from? Very little, only that she had been a mistress at the home for Christian orphans at North Tottenham, where there was a hideous scandal some years before. Then she must have been older than she looked, according to your description. Possibly. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Reynolds said, "But I haven't asked you about this formula, or whatever you may call it. All these vowels here. Is it a cipher?" No, but it is really a great curiosity, and it raises some extraordinary questions, which are outside this particular case. To begin with, and I am sure I could go much farther back than my beginning if I had the necessary scholarship, I once read an English rendering of a Greek manuscript of the 2nd or 3rd century. I won't be certain which. It's a long time since I've seen the thing. The translator and the editor of it was of the opinion that it was a Mithraic ritual, but I have gathered that weightier authorities are strongly inclined to discredit this view. At any rate, it was no doubt an initiation rite into some mystery. Possibly it had Gnostic connections, I don't know, but our interest lies in this, that one of the stages, or portals, or whatever you call them, consisted almost exactly of that formula you have in your hand. I don't say that the vowels and double vowels are in the same order. I don't think the Greek manuscript has any AES or AAS, but it is perfectly clear that the two documents are of the same kind and have the same purpose. In advancing a little in time from the Greek manuscript, I don't think it's very surprising that the final operation of an incantation in medieval and later magic consisted of this wailing on vowels arranged in a certain order. But here is something that is surprising. A good many years ago, I strolled one Sunday morning into a church in Bloomsbury, the headquarters of a highly respectable sect, and in the middle of a very dignified ritual, there rose quite suddenly, without preface or warning, this very sound, a wild wail of vowels. The effect was astounding, anyhow. Whether it was terrifying or merely funny is a matter of taste. You'll have guessed what I heard. They called it speaking with tongues, and they believe it to be a heavenly language. And I scarcely mean to say they meant very well. But the problem is, how did a congregation of solid Scotch Presbyterians hit on that queer, ancient, and not over-sanctified method of expressing spiritual emotion? Good one, Kim. It is a singular puzzle. And that woman, that is not by any means so difficult. The good Scotsman, I can't think how they did it, got hold of something that didn't belong to them. She was in her own tradition. And as they say down there, the darkness is undying. Well, I don't know about this Miss Hayes. She seems suspect. So anyway, there are a couple of somewhat short stories by Arthur Machen. And I don't know what I'll read next week. Maybe I'll toss one or two of these in with regular fiction. Whatever you guys want. And thanks for spending part of your Tuesday night with me. And I'm going to bed. Good night.